Inside the Women's Museum of California, in a room lined with clothes, buttons, postcards, and political
This
signs,
was the poem.
President of the museum, Anne Hoiberg, reads from a poem written by a suffragist more than a century
For
ago.
the long work day, for the taxes we pay, for the laws we obey, we want something to say.
But who were these trailblazers fighting for women's right to vote? And more specifically, how did San Diegans play a part? In 1895, Susan B. Anthony, the famous leader of the national suffrage movement, paid a visit to the then sleepy town of San Diego.
And the town was so excited, the famous Susan B. Anthony. She spoke at the Methodist Church, it was standing room only.
Determined that California women would get the right to vote, in 1896, Anthony led the first local campaign. The amendment passed in San Diego, but for the state,
Went down to failure, which was very disappointing.
at the time, women were considered to be morally superior to men, and there was a fear of what steps they would take in society should they be able to vote, particularly on the issue of prohibition. Women's suffrage could hurt the liquor industry. It wasn't for another 15 years, in 1911, that women would seize another opportunity, this time led by a local, Point Loma resident Dr. Charlotte Baker.
She would deliver a baby in the morning, and then the afternoon she would dedicate to civic duties. And so she became president of the San Diego Women's Suffrage Association.
Suffragists got organized.
Now the Temperance Army's marching.
With support from other prominent women, like Flora Kimball of National City, Ellen Browning Scripps, and attorney Clara Shortridge Foltz. The local suffragists used a three-pronged strategy they believed was sure to work. For starters, instead of protest, the women used the power of persuasion.
And these women would go into a man's home, and they would sit with that man and talk about the importance of women getting the right to vote. And they wouldn't leave until they convinced him. And they even said they were conducting invasions of men's homes.
The women took advantage of the times. The California Exposition was coming to San Diego, and Balboa Park was having a groundbreaking ceremony in July of 1911. For their second strategy, the suffragists would parade. They decorated a float with yellow ribbon promoting their clear message of equality.
And they called it the Modern Boston Tea Party Float. It also had on there taxation without representation is tyranny now as it was in 1773.
For the most part, San Diego County was still a rural town. Agriculture was highly dependent on the labor of women. The suffragists knew they had to reach the outlying communities by using their third strategy, automobile campaigning. The campaign started on a Monday morning.
4 women left San Diego for Oceanside. It probably took them several hours to get there. The roads were probably rutted, dusty, dirty, what have you.
From there, they drove to speak to men in Escondido, then to Fallbrook, and finally to Ramona.
Can you imagine it took 3 days to cover our county, and it was highly successful. And then October 11th occurred, and that was the big election day. Was it going to go down to defeat like it did in 1896, or would it be successful?
It was a win. The final statewide vote was close, with a margin less than 1.5%. In San Diego, the margin was wider, with more than 57% of men voting yes to grant women the right to vote.
When you think of the determination of those suffragists, it just seems unbelievable that the numbers weren't higher.
But the votes were high enough, and California became the 6th state in the country to give women the right to vote, all of which were Western states.
How do you explain that? But I do think it has to do with the sense of equality between men and women, the pioneer spirit, the progressiveness of people who would venture from the East Coast to come out here. To me, that's fascinating.
Maya Trabulsi, KPBS News.